was a book about capital. And we still live in a society in which capital dominates. In fact, if you think about it, when Marx was writing Capital as a dominant form of economic organization only existed in a very small corner of the world. I would argue it's more relevant today than it ever was. On the other hand, the institutional framework in which capital was existing when Marx was writing was a very specific sort. It was, of course, Western European, dominated by notions of private property rights and things of that sort. In its spread, it's colonized quite different political systems and made them consistent with the capitalist dynamic, so that you have to adjust Marx's arguments, I think, a little bit to take account of the completely different dynamics which exist through, say, the complexity of the contemporary financial system. Today, you could trace in terms of Haussmann's reconstruction of Paris, the rise of new financial institutions, the development of consumer society and the new department stores, of spectacle to encourage new forms of consumerism, going to war to, jack up the military side of things. I mean, all of those things were present. But one of the big differences was then it was relatively small scale. Now we have a situation which is, of course, global and at a much larger scale, much more intricate. We have all those kinds of things which we have to look at as being different, but the basics of what Marx had to say about capital are still remarkably true. Conventional economics has no internal critique of what can go wrong with capital. So they can only start to understand crises as something that comes from outside, an accident from outside, bad policy by the state, things of that sort. Whereas Marx, by maintaining this distinction between value and price, actually sets up the possibility of an internal critique, so Marx can talk about the internal contradictions of capital, which no contemporary analyst coming with an economics background can understand at all. So Marx has a theory of crisis formation within capitalism rather than a theory of crisis formation from outside of capitalism. Now, that doesn't mean Marx denied that crises could come from outside. Yes, they could. Wars, ecological catastrophes and so on, yes, they could happen. But what Marx does so brilliantly is to talk about the internal contradictions. And those are crucial to come to terms with in a world where we have a very, very serious set of problems which nobody from contemporary economics seems to have a faintest clue of how to resolve. He never denies that capital has been incredibly constructive in terms of the new technologies, the new possibilities it creates. But it has also a destructive side, and the destructive side is now taking over the whole system. And I think Marx is very clear about that. So this is something we have to look at. And that's why I think Marx is more relevant now than he was back in 1860. Shakespeare, Cervantes, Goethe, and all those Dante, etc. And it's a magnificent piece of literature. And if you can sit back and just say, oh, this is not simply a grind through the economics, but a wonderful piece of literary craftsmanship, then people get a completely different understanding of it, and they get to intuit what Marx is about. And I think that, to me, is one of the most important things that comes out of a real close reading of Marx's Capital. But it takes a little while these days to get students who are used to everything coming via Twitter and Facebook and all the rest of it to look at a very thick book. People would say, what? Read that? That's not very radical. You say, yes it is. And to get people to read a book these days is actually quite a challenge in contemporary society.